Hey folks, Ronnie Turner here with you once again from the Prophecy Freak YouTube channel. This week we've got a clip from the NASA YouTube site, and the Director of Planetary Science, Jim Green, is giving his take on the findings by the Astronomical Journal talking about the 9th planet. And then I've also got a clip that goes along with that from Fox News reporting on the same thing, the same findings. Basically, there's supposedly a very large planet in our solar system that we haven't seen because it takes 10,000 years to orbit the sun. So we'll let you take a look at that and start that off, see what you think.
Director of Planetary Science at NASA. You know, NASA works with the international science community to explore our solar system and beyond. We look to unravel the mysteries that intrigue us all as we explore and answer the big questions. The idea of a new planet is certainly an exciting one for me as a planetary scientist, and I think for all of us. The January 20th paper in the Astronomical Journal is fueling our interest in planetary exploration and stimulating a healthy debate that's part of the scientific process. I couldn't be more pleased about what's happening. You know, it's all about starting the process that could lead to an exciting result. What we're really seeing is an early prediction based on modeling from limited observations. What's exciting is that, like NASA's journey to Mars or New Horizons flyby of Pluto, you will have a front row seat to see how the scientific process unfolds. Theories like this serve to stimulate ideas and conversation. They tap into our innate curiosity. It's important for us to continue to work, and we will. Anytime we have an interesting idea like this, we always apply Carl Sagan's rules for critical thinking, which include independent confirmation of the facts, looking for alternate explanations, and encouraging scientific debate. If Planet X is out there, we'll find it together.
On the edge of the solar system, astronomers finding evidence of what could be another planet, nicknamed Planet 9. Former astronaut and senior advisor at the Intrepid Museum here in New York, Mike Massimino, here to tell us more about this. Good day to you. You've been up there a couple times.
Yeah, but not that far.
Yeah, this is really, way out there, right?
Way out
How
there,
far
yeah.
is it?
Well, they're approximating now because they haven't gotten a telescope to actually see it, right? But there's evidence that it's out there.
How far?
So to give you an idea, Pluto is about 4.6 billion miles away. This is between 20 billion, at least 20 billion, they think, to maybe 100 billion miles away.
That's a road trip.
Far.
Wait, you said they haven't seen it yet?
No. So what they did is they've been studying that area of the sky, and there's about 6 objects, apparently, about a half dozen objects that seem to be, their orbit seem to be influenced by a large object out there. So they're looking at that evidence. In other words, they see how these things are behaving, and they are pretty convinced that there's a big object out there, a planet that's orbiting around our sun, part of our solar system, therefore, that is causing this behavior out there.
And much bigger than Earth.
Probably. They're not really sure exactly the size of it. Again, what they're looking at is gravitational attraction. And so it could have a very more of a massive core and a bit of an atmosphere, or maybe less so. It could be more gaseous, maybe the size even as big as Neptune, but somewhere probably at least as big as Earth, probably larger than Earth.
I'm reading it may take 10 to 20,000 years to orbit the sun. I mean, that is one long, nasty winter.
Yeah, so the closer you are, the quicker you go. The further you are, yeah.
But
so
as an astronaut,
that's a nasty winter.
How significant do you think this could be?
As far as like sending people there?
No, just, you know, I mean, what's the impact? I mean, look, when Pluto was demoted, I was ticked off.
Right. So was I, actually. Because we grew up with Pluto. Now it's saying it's no longer a planet. So this would be the Pluto replacement. No, I think it's very interesting because it shows that, you know, we think we know what's out there. And we kind of do, but we get new information where it increases our understanding. So you never really know everything when it comes to the construct of our universe, even our solar system. I mean, relatively, this is, even though it's 20 billion miles away is a long way, it's in our neighborhood. All right, so now, and we're just finding out what's in our neighborhood still. Imagine what else is out there beyond. So,
and you've been there.
That's why I think it's significant.
If true, 150 years since we've identified one. We'll wait for the solid evidence.
This could be really big, but I think that now the search is on, the chase is on, see who the winner is going to be, to actually get a telescope on it so we can get a real image. This is a fake image that you see there on your graphic.
Thank you, Mike.
All right.
See you soon.
We have a really big neighborhood.
Next, we've got Michael Snyder, who is a legal and financial expert, was a guest on the Jim Baker Show. He's been on the show a couple of times, and basically he's a lawyer, but also has is considered a financial expert. So he's talking about a couple things, one being something that we heard on a past show about the executive orders that have taken place in Washington, basically giving the U.S. president the inside route to dictatorship if a severe national crisis arises. But also I thought it was interesting how Michael Snyder talks about watching the market signs. Basically a replay is occurring of what happened in 2008, and he's comparing that to what's happened in 2015 and then the current year. And his concern is we're really headed for a super financial crisis. He benchmarks two things, primarily the price of oil and then the S&P 500. So it's going to be interesting to see how the market unfolds and to see what continues to happen in the world. But we'll keep an eye on that. And just wanted you guys to see it, check it out, and see what you think.
So because he was an attorney, he was a lawyer, actually in Washington on K Street. And he builds a case. He has two different sites, the Economic Collapse blog and Into the American Dream. You can look them up on Google. They'll be the first ones to pop up in the Google search engine. And he sets up his case whenever he writes, so that there's no room. You can't argue with Michael Snyder. He argues it like a true lawyer from K Street, Washington.
But I have never heard about it. This is news to me. I'm absolutely shocked. But the executive orders, the statutes, everything is in place, Jim. People need to understand. People think, I'm an American, I have rights. But since 9/11, during the Bush administration and into the Obama administration, it's not just one executive order, it's not just one statute, it's not just one court decision, but over time, over the years, this comprehensive kind of program has been put together where if there is a major national crisis, Barack Obama, all he has to do is declare a national emergency, and he can essentially become a dictator. From a purely legal standpoint, the answer is yes. The power is there. The only question is whether it will be used or not. Now, it would have to be a big crisis, probably something bigger than 9/11, Jim. But if we did have something big enough, the powers exist where Obama could not only take control of everything in our society, but he could suspend the upcoming election if it came down to that. Now, there would have to be a big enough crisis to justify that. That would have to be in place first. But if that crisis came, the power is there to do that from a legal standpoint. You know, a lot of people out there, they've been hearing about all the things that are coming, and they kind of expect us to go from normal life to the end of the world just like that. But if you look at the scriptures, that's not the pattern that we typically see. When we see the judgment of God, we usually see a progression. For example, if you go back to the book of Exodus and you look at the book of Exodus, the 10 plagues, they started out with frogs and lice, and by the end, all the firstborn were dead. Or if you look at the book of Revelation, it starts out with the 4 horsemen riding, and by the end, the worst death and destruction in all of human history. Let's go back and let's look at what really happened in 2015 for a second. Everyone agrees that 2015 was the worst year for stocks since 2008. In fact, on New Year's Day, all over the world, in the mainstream news, there were all kinds of headlines. 2015, worst year since last financial crisis. 2015, worst year for stocks since 2008. These mainstream editors, these mainstream newspapers, they don't understand the Shemitah year, they don't understand these things, but they were linking in their headlines this last year cycle to the previous one and saying, hey, it was the worst since the last time around. So everyone agrees it was the worst year for stocks since the last Shemitah cycle. Now everyone agrees, CNN reported this, close to 70% of all investors lost money in 2015. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody also agrees that globally, stock markets all over the world, trillions of dollars were wiped out globally. Trillions. That sounds like a pretty big wiping out for the Shemitah to me. Everyone agrees on that. No one disputes that trillions of dollars of wealth was wiped out in that year. Everybody also agrees that junk bonds crashed in 2015. We're going to have a chart. We're going to talk about this because it's very important. Junk bonds crashed in 2015. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody agrees that the price of oil crashed. Energy companies were going out of business. Everybody agrees that happened in 2015.
Okay,
yeah, I'm saying that it started in 2015 during the Shemitah, and particularly from the end of the Shemitah forward, and we're going to look at a whole bunch of stuff regarding that today. But you know, most people they're not understanding. You know, in the first 9 months of 2015,
yes,
674 hedge funds shut down. That was for the first 3 quarters, then accelerated into the 4th quarter. It's being projected by the time the final number is in for 2015 that close to 1,000 hedge funds would have shut down in 2015. You know, we saw companies like Third Avenue Management. They were managing a $788 million fund focused on junk bonds. Well, junk bonds started crashing. People started pulling their money out, and then all of a sudden they rushed in and they shut it down. They said no one else can get their money back. And so right now, if people have their life savings or they've got huge amounts of money invested in that fund, they're out of luck. And if junk bonds keep crashing, well, eventually they might be lucky to get back pennies on the dollar. We're already starting to see some of these financial institutions drop like flies. We're already starting to see so many of these things start to unfold. And so if the producers have it ready to pull up a chart, it's a junk bond chart. If they could pull up if you have that ready to go on the monitors. And what I want people to look at this chart is at the left-hand side, this is over the last 10 years. And if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, you can see this is a chart that shows what's happened to junk bonds. In particular, it shows what happened to an ETF that I watch very, very closely that goes by the letters J and K. It basically mirrors the behavior of junk bonds. Now, back in 2008, you notice that this ETF and junk bonds, they started to crash hard. Now, this happened before the stock market crashed. Because when there's a financial crisis, when there's a financial crash, it doesn't affect the strongest and biggest companies first. It doesn't affect those that, you know, the biggest, hugest corporations. Where we look for trouble initially is companies that are smaller, they're riskier, they're more leveraged, they're in more debt, they're not considered to be as strong. And where this will show up first is in junk bonds and their debt. And now don't let that term junk bonds throw you. Junk bonds are not really junk. The junk bonds are bonds that come from companies that are considered to be a little bit more risky, so you get a little bit higher return. Now, as you can see from the chart, in 2008, junk bonds started to crash hard. In the middle part of 2008, this happened before stocks started to crash. And this is exactly what we would expect to see before a major stock market crash. We'd expect to see junk bonds go first. Now, since the recovery, since that time, that ETF that you see on the screen there, J&K, has been generally trading in a range between 36 and 42. And I've been watching it all this time, and I've been waiting, because I've been waiting for it to drop, go through the 35 and keep going, because that's a very, very important psychological level. And so all this time I've been waiting for it to break through 35 and keep going, because that would be confirmation that a new financial crisis had begun. Now, that had not happened all of this time until it finally did in December. And you can see in the chart, it not only broke through 35, it kept going, it broke through 34, and now today it's actually a little bit lower than that chart is from a few days ago. When I checked it upstairs earlier, it was about 33.7. So this is exactly the kind of behavior we would expect right before a major stock market crash in the United States. This is a major, major red flag, and we've not seen this red flag since the last crisis. So this is setting off huge alarm bells for me, Jim.
Financial Armageddon approaches. U.S. banks, this is one I read earlier, have $247 trillion of exposure to derivatives. See, the average person honestly don't know what a derivative is.
Stock, you're buying an ownership interest in a company. You're buying something real. When you buy a bond, you're buying the debt of a company. Derivatives are not based on anything real. They're just based on, a derivative is essentially a bet that something is either going to happen or not going to happen in the future. And either you win and you make money, or you lose and you lose money. Some people compare them to insurance contracts, and they can be used that way. But I compare them to, particularly what the big Wall Street banks are doing, to a form of legalized gambling.
I was going to ask if it had anything to do with Las Vegas. It sounded like you're betting on something to happen or not happen.
Yeah, and so these big banks, they didn't learn their lesson the last time around with the last crisis. Instead, they've become even more reckless. They're gambling, they're doing all kinds of craziness all over the place. And so, but these big banks are so critical to our system, because since the last crisis, we remember too big to fail. They told us they were going to fix that problem.
Yeah.
Well, the problem of too big to fail has gotten bigger than ever. The too big to fail banks have collectively gotten 40% larger since the last time around. Meanwhile, 1,400 smaller banks have totally gone out of existence. So the problem of too big to fail is now bigger than ever.
So if they're too big to fail, that means the government has to bail them out?
Well, that's what they're counting on. And so they're being super reckless. If they win big. If they lose, well, they figure the government will come in and pick up the pieces. And so I want to give you a few figures really quick that can give you an idea of just how incredibly reckless these the biggest banks in America. For example, if you look at Citigroup, they've got total assets of about $1.8 trillion, but they've got exposure to these derivatives contracts in excess of $53 trillion.
My goodness.
Wow. JP Morgan Chase, they're the biggest bank in America by assets. They've got about $2.4 trillion of assets. But in terms of exposure to derivatives, they've got more than $51 trillion of exposure. And these are the latest numbers. I pulled them out of an official U.S. government report just a couple of weeks ago. Goldman Sachs, they've got less than $1 trillion of total assets, but they've also got more than $51 trillion of exposure to derivatives. Bank of America, assets of about $2.1 trillion, exposure to derivatives of $45 trillion. So that just gives you some ideas of how these banks, they're living on the edge. And meanwhile, the next financial crisis is coming. What happened in the last one? We started to see too big to fail banks go down. They got into trouble. They needed government bailout. That created panic. It created a credit crunch. All of a sudden, people couldn't get money. People couldn't, the banks didn't want to lend to each other or anyone else. And so it created a credit crunch, and it created an economic slowdown, because our whole system is based on debt and credit. And so coming up, what we're going into, and we're going to look at some more charts and things that are going on. People, you know, if you have a business or you work somewhere, you're going to notice people are coming in and they don't have as much money to spend. And fewer people are coming in. And so businesses will start to shut down. Businesses will start to lay off workers. We'll start to see unemployment skyrocket. So people are going to be hurting, just like last time around. But just like last time around, most people are individually and as families are living on the edge as well. In fact, right before I came down, you know, on the show before, I've said 62% of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Just today on the Drudge Report, just came out, on the Drudge Report, now it's up to 63%. It's even worse. 63% of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So if that paycheck goes away, they start hurting really, really fast. And so that's what it's going to mean for ordinary people, Jim. But there's so many parallels. It's not just junk bonds that we're talking about. In fact, if the producers can put up the chart of the second chart about oil, the price of oil on the screen, and we can take a look at that. But just before this great stock market crash in 2008, the price of oil crashed. It soared up to about $140 a barrel, crashed hard to beneath $40 a barrel briefly. And that was before the stock market crash. So this is something else that happened before the stock market crash. And we've never seen a crash, anything like that ever again, until just recently. On the chart, you can see over the last 18 months, the price of oil has gone from $108 a barrel Then it went below $38 a barrel for the very first time since the last stock market crash, 2008. And just today, oil crashed some more. I checked the figures before I came down. It's down close to $34 a barrel. We've got energy companies.
That's a real extreme low.
It really is. And it's causing a huge crisis because the energy industry was the primary engine of the creation.
Go back to that chart again. That's 2008. That's a long ways for me to read, but
yes.
That's 2008. That big crash there. So then here we are right now. There's 2015 and all there. So it's just going down and down and down. And these are warnings. You know, the Bible talks about signals and warnings. And, you know, even the stock market people, they read warnings, don't they? They have signals that says that's a sell signal or that's a buy signal, you know.
Yeah, it's down to about $34 a barrel, but it's having a huge impact all over the world because not only oil, but commodities, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but emerging markets, when during the boom times, they were like Brazil. You look at Brazil. During the boom times, Brazil, they just gorged on debt, not only the government, but the companies down there. And most of it was denominated in very inexpensive U.S. dollars. Well, what's happened now is these emerging markets, the things they export, whether it's oil, commodities, other things, those prices are going way down, so they're getting less money. Meanwhile, the value of the U.S. dollar is shot up. So they have to take much more of their own local currencies to pay back and service those debts. So this double whammy is just killing emerging markets like Brazil. It's the 7th largest economy on the entire planet. And Goldman Sachs recently came out and said what's happening in Brazil is not just a recession, but they plunged into what Goldman Sachs says is an outright depression. And so
boy, nobody uses that word anymore.
I know. In fact, I brought a chart for the stock market in Brazil. If the producers want to put that up on the screen, it's kind of out of order, but if you can find it, the stock market in Brazil started crashing during the Shemitah, but then the U.S. markets kind of recovered a little bit, not all the way, but in Brazil, they just kept going down and down and down all the way through the rest of the year. So that's what we're seeing in Brazil, where it accelerated the decline of the stock market. The stock market crash in Brazil accelerated into the end of the year. Or if you want to pull up the chart for Canada that I brought as well, the Canadian stock market has done the same thing because they're very heavily dependent on oil. My wife's got family up there in Alberta, and during the boom years it was great because of all the oil up there. They were doing really, really well. But Canada...
Is this Canada now on the screen?
I believe it is. But Canada, their market's gone down and down and down and down and down all year long. And Canada is the 11th largest economy in the world. And so we're seeing these problems all over the world, particularly these economies that are reliant on commodities and oil. But here in the U.S., the oil industry and the energy industry, they were the primary engine for the growth of good-paying jobs in this country since the last recession. And we need good-paying jobs if we're going to have a middle class. But now energy companies are cutting back, they're shutting down, workers are being laid off like crazy, their debt is starting to go bad. That's helping fuel the rout and junk bonds. But, this is the kind of thing we saw back in 2008, but this time around it's even worse. And actually, the price of oil never got this low, around $34 a barrel last time around. And there doesn't appear to be much hope that it's going to bounce back any soon. In fact, they're saying it's going to go even lower. So this is another major warning sign, another parallel that we saw last time around that we're seeing once again.
Is this why Saudi Arabia is in such turmoil right now?
Well, it's a big part of it, certainly contributing, because, for years they've been loving the high price of oil, yes. But now it's really hurting them, it's hurting Russia, it's hurting a lot of these countries. But it's not just oil, Jim. If I'm sorry, I'm being so mean to the producers today, but if they want to bring up the chart for commodities, actually copper, the chart for copper, the price of copper, they call copper Dr. Copper, and they call it Dr. Copper for a reason, because it's known as a leading indicator of what is going to happen next to the global economy.
Wow. Not Dr. Gold?
Not Dr. Gold, Dr. Copper. And in 2008, if you look on the screen, we see that there was a huge crash in the price of copper. And this happened before the stock market crash. So all these things I'm talking about happened just prior to the stock market crash, so we would expect to see similar things happening. if it was happening again. And that's exactly what we're seeing. In fact, the price of copper has dropped to the lowest level that we've seen since the last financial crisis. And it's not just copper, iron ore, aluminum, tin, all kinds of industrial commodities crashed throughout the second half of 2015. This is exactly what we would expect to see if a major financial crisis was unfolding right in front of our eyes.
This is incredible. That means the supplies we need to build with and all are crashing. So is that why it's an indicator? Why would copper be the indicator?
Yeah, well, a lot of these things are when there's a lot of economic activity in China and elsewhere, there's demand for all these resources, so that drives prices up. When economic activity slows down, people don't need as much copper, they don't need as much lumber, they don't need these different things because not as much activity is taking place. And so we've seen global trade decline dramatically. Another bellwether of the global economy, South Korean exports. For years, people look at South Korean exports as kind of an indicator of what's happening in the worldwide economy. It's been one of those, they call it a canary in the coal mine. They call it one of those leading indicators. So that's something that's watched very, very carefully. And in December, South Korean exports were down 13.8% from a year earlier. That's just another, and I talked about many of these other numbers last time I was on, how global trade is slowing down, declining in China, and U.S. exports are declining. All over the world, exports are going down. Global trade is shrinking. This is exactly what we would expect to see if we're entering a global recession. If I was going to create a textbook example of what the start of a new financial crisis looked like, this every check mark is there. Every box is checked. What has been going on over the past several months would be a perfect scenario for a textbook. Another thing we can talk about is the velocity of money. If the producers want to put that chart up on the screen, the velocity of money really, traditionally, has really helped explain to us what is going on out there. If you look at every shaded area on that chart right there, in every single shaded area, those represent recessions since 1960. Every single time the velocity of money has declined during a recession. And that makes sense because when things are good, I buy something from you, you buy something from someone else, and people are feeling good, and money flows efficiently through the system. When things are hard, things aren't working right, well, people start holding on to their money, money doesn't flow as well. So the velocity of money goes down. And so we've seen this recession after recession. Of course, during the last recession, it was the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The velocity of money dropped dramatically, as you can see on the chart. Now, a funny thing happened afterwards. It ticked up briefly, but then it kept going down and down and down. So during the supposed economic recovery, but it kept going down and down and down, and it's dropped now, just recently, to an all-time record low. This is an indication of a very, very sick economy, and it's another one of those warning bells that says, big trouble, this is not good.
How many indicators are dropping like this? How many signs do you see?
Well, Jim, there are literally dozens, because I write about this every day on my website.
Yes.
You know, and every day I'm putting this information out. If people want to go to my website, I've got over 1 million words on there talking about all of this. So I've been talking about this and chronicling this for months. So my readers, none of this is a surprise to them. When the stock market is crashing, they say, well, of course, this is a natural progression of everything that we've been seeing so far. So, but for months I've been writing about parallel after parallel between 2008 and what's happening right now. You know, this new manufacturing data that I just came out with right now. If we were entering a new recession, we would expect manufacturing activity to get smaller, to start contracting. And it is. In fact, the number for December just came out. Manufacturing activity is contracting at the fastest pace since 2009, the last recession. This is exactly what we would expect to see happen. It's just another one of those parallels between last time and what's happening again right now. So, you know, we all learned about, so we were looking for this pattern coming up, and some people thought it was going to be the end of the world. But let me share with you what I saw. I've talked about these economic things, and so I based on everything that I saw, does it sound like a financial crisis is starting, has started? Would you all agree with me on that? But it's not just the financial realm, Jim. I think there was a special significance to this particular Shemitah year, and let me explain to you what I'm talking about. From the legal world where I'm from, in the legal world, there's a pronouncement of guilt before a sentence is administered. And I believe during the entire Shemitah year that America was shown her guilt the whole year long. We saw this with the gay marriage Supreme Court decision. That came out, America cheered, the whole world. It made headlines all over the world. We saw the Ashley Madison scandal, which came out, and millions of men were exposed to going to this website specifically designed for adultery, and lots of, unfortunately, Christian pastors and leaders were on that list. But more than anything else, we have these undercover Planned Parenthood videos come out during the Shemitah year. So the whole world got to see exactly what's going on, where we've killed, the number you like to use on the show is 70 million babies, and Planned Parenthood is harvesting their parts, their organs, selling them off to the highest bidder, where they're used in scientific experiments. And a lot of us knew this was going on, but the videos came out, showed exactly the barbarity of what's going on, displayed for all the world to see. The whole world got to see America on trial. America was guilty. Did we repent? No. After all those videos came out, some surveys were taken. And a couple of surveys, and the surveys showed that the American people not only did they not want to shut down Planned Parenthood, but they wanted to continue funding them, giving them hundreds of millions of dollars of our tax dollars a year by about a 2-to-1 margin. Overwhelmingly, the American people are in support of that. And then Congress had a decision to make just recently where they had this budget deal. And not only did the Republicans not stand up and say, okay, we've got to defund them, but they gave them all of their funding.
That's right.
Last year, Planned Parenthood got $553 million from the government.
Shocking.
The Republicans could have stood up and said, no, we're going to stop this. The Republicans rolled over and said, no, keep it going. So America was shown her guilt during this Shemitah year. We were given an opportunity to repent. Did we repent? No. We said, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to keep shaking our fist at God. And so then the Shemitah year ended, and this pattern of disasters, which I talked about earlier, has begun. I believe the judgment of God is not coming to America. I believe the judgment of God is here.
Yes.
I believe it started. It's intensifying.
And you said every major stock market crashed at that time.
Yes.
At the end of the year. At the end of the Shemitah year.
Well, yeah, right at the end of the Shemitah year, every stock market around the world globally crashed. China was down 40% at one point. China bounced back a little bit, but then now so they were only down about 30%. And you say, well, a third of the stock market wiped out. That's pretty bad. Now they're crashing again to start the year, Jim. So they're going down again. But we saw this. Every major stock market around the world crashed right at the end of the Shemitah year. Now, some, like the United States, bounced back a bit. Of course, not to the level where they were. But now we're starting to see another huge downturn. So in 2015, trillions of dollars were wiped out for 2015, and now we're going into the next stage.
But Brazil heads for worst recession since 1901, economists forecast.
That's right. Yeah, Brazil, as we mentioned earlier, Goldman Sachs says they're in a depression, and it's not just Brazil. All over South America, they're plunging into recession. They've got massive debt crisis. Debts are going bad. It's chaos down there in South America, and I actually wrote about this 6 months ago. I warned about the South American financial crisis of 2015, the debt crisis down there, and because South America is so far ahead of us, actually, because they're a total disaster. But this is something that's happening globally, Jim. It's not just the United States. It's not just China. Globally, we're seeing this meltdown. If you ask Warren Buffett, did anything happen in 2015? Well, Warren Buffett lost $7.8 billion in 2015. Do you think Warren Buffett is saying, oh, nothing happened in 2015? When you lose $7.8 billion in a year, that's pretty bad.
Yeah,
But one thing people need to be watching is the S&P 500, because right now, there's a very important line in the sand at 2,000. That's a very, very important psychological barrier. If we break through 2,000 on the S&P 500 and start plunging down toward 1,900, that could really start setting off some fear and panic in the market. So, yeah, this year is setting the stage for some really, really bad things to happen. but we need to, as Christians, as the church in America, we need to change our mindset. Because Jim just talked about martyrs. And that's what's coming. That's what's down the horizon. So we've got to live with no fear. We've got to be willing to stand up for Jesus Christ no matter what. Now, as the church, what has our perspective been on the book of Revelation, on the things of the end times? Well, our perspective has been, we can't wait to get out of here. We're completely scared to face anything that might be coming in the book of Revelation. So our primary goal and thinking is, let's get out of here as fast as we can. It reminds me of a very old episode of Seinfeld. Did you used to watch Seinfeld back in the day?
Yes.
Well, there was an episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza was at a birthday party. And he went back into the kitchen and there was a fire. And so George Costanza comes running out. He knocks over an old lady. He pushes children out of the way. And he's the first one out of the house. And that's, as Christians, that's how we've been viewing things. We don't care about anyone else. We just want to get out of here.
Right.
We're not thinking about the billions of souls that are lost, that are headed for an eternity without God.
That's it.
If they take our lives, that's just a ticket home. But what about the lost? What about the billions that need to be saved? Instead of being looking forward to getting out of here, we should be looking forward to run to the battle, to save souls. We should be looking forward Yes. We should be looking forward to the greatest harvest of souls the world has ever seen, and yet all the prosperity preachers are preaching, oh, prosperity's coming, and when bad things come, well, then we're immediately pulled out of here. Instead, we need to be focusing on the finest hour of the church, the greatest move of God, because that's what's coming. Yeah, as I approach the new year, that's what I felt the message for this year was, because there is going to be shaking this year. In 2016, everything changes, Jim. Everything is going to change this year. It's going to be a year unlike we've seen. There's going to be panic. There's going to be fear. People are going to be shaken. But the believers, we are not supposed to live in fear. My wife and I, we don't live in fear. We live in a constant state of shalom, even though I deal with this stuff day in, day out. Very hard message. We live because when things start coming, people are going to look at you, and people are going to see how you respond. Sometimes to be a leader, you don't have to say anything. But people are going to be watching. All the people that you've been saying, you should watch the Jim Baker show. You should go to the Economic Collapse blog. All those people now are going to watch you. They're going to see how you respond.
That's right.
Are you responding with panic and fear, or are you responding with strength and courage? Are you going to be the rock in the storm? Now's not a time to try to dig a hole and hide from the world. Now's the time to run to the battle. Now's the time to set your face like flint, to say, we will not be afraid. We will live for Jesus Christ, no matter what comes. Now, yes, we are preparing, because when God, from Genesis to Revelation, he gives us warnings. And he gives us warnings not so that we can fear, but so that we will not be afraid. He gives us warnings so we'll know what's coming, that he is in control, that he has a plan, and he often gives us instructions about what to do. And we're going to preach the gospel. We're going to bring hope to a world that doesn't have hope. We're going to have a smile on our face, a song in our heart, as the world is literally falling apart around us. We're going to be the triumphant people of God. We're going to become the kind of bride that Jesus deserves, a bride that's wildly and madly and passionately in love with him. And this is going to be our finest hour, even in the midst of all the chaos and all the darkness. God is raising up a remnant, and so there's no place I'd rather be than right here, right now.
Amen.
I'm so glad to be living this time in history.
Yes.
My wife and I believe the greatest chapters of our lives are still ahead, and we're going to do it. We're going to be the generation that finally gets things right, and we're going to welcome back the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.